Josh Van Norman is the current superintendent principal of San Antonio Unified School District, located in Monterey, California. Serving as one of the state of California's youngest superintendents, Mr. Van Norman has already brought about positive change to a district that had experienced declining enrollment, chronic absenteeism, and low academic performance in the years prior to his arrival. Mr. Van Norman's relational and innovative leadership has been a hallmark of his and in various districts he's worked throughout his career. Both Mr. Van Norman and his wife Denise are both alumni of USC and will raise their son Roman to wear cardinal and gold and to always fight on. And lastly, I would like to introduce Angelina Arrington. Angelina Arrington's resume details a strategic and unique 28-year career path that has allowed her to gain experience as an entrepreneur, community organizer, and educational leader. She earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in English from the University of Southern California, a Master of Arts degree in Education from Pepperdine University, a professional Clear California multiple subject teaching credential, and certification from the Gonzalez Institute of Human Development. She is currently at the dissertation proposal stage of earning her Doctor of Education degree in Educational Policy, Organization, and Leadership with a concentration in Global Studies and Education from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Her proposed dissertation topic is a participatory action research dissertation study based on her ongoing work with Somalia American School in rural Ghana as a teacher, trainer, and mentor. The study aims to document her and her research sites' collaborative efforts to create valuable distance learning education solutions to continue curriculum planning, educational delivery, and professional development during Ghana's COVID-19 emergency lockdown order using information and communication technologies such as WhatsApp and local radio programming. Her passion for education centers around helping students that have a meaningful school experience filled with growth, adventure, and joy, and supporting the adults around them to do the vital work for educating and nurturing them. We are all very excited to have them here to share their Trojan community, to share with our Trojan community. And ladies and gentlemen, our panelists.
Senator Gonzalez, can you please tell us about your bill?
Absolutely, and thanks so much, Pasha, and thank you, Faith, very much. And I'm just really honored to be with these exceptional panelists today, this Saturday morning, which is really great. And I'm not a Trojan, but I love all the Trojans that are in my family and my friends. So here's to you, USC. You're always putting together really amazing forums for the general public, so thanks so much. Yes, my bill was SB 1130 that I created back actually in February before COVID-19 actually hit. Prior to being in the Senate, not only being on the Long Beach City Council, I had worked for Microsoft for over 5 years, and seeing in that role as a social responsibility manager, seeing so many kids in the South LA region, in Boyle Heights, up in Pacoima, just not having access to technology or even the infrastructure, it sort of inspired me to create SB 1130. So basically what it did was SB 1130 looked at our California Services Fund, and that fund has about $250 million in it currently. It's a fund that's derived from ratepayer dollars. So you pay a percentage on your cell phone bill and on your landline bill, and it goes into this California Services Fund. And the PUC, our California Public Utilities Commission oversees that fund. And what they do is they have programs for digital inclusion, but I felt like they weren't going far enough. A lot of what we see in South LA, where I represent, in parts of Long Beach and up in rural communities, is that kids don't have access to the internet at all. There's no fiber, there's no investment. So SB 1130 allowed for investment and encouraged internet service providers to invest more in these communities, to increase the speeds, and to ensure that they were laying down future-proof technology, which would be fiber, which lasts longer and is more bang for our buck in the state. And it also lended an opportunity to provide more competition. Oftentimes we're in communities where we think one service provider is the only provider, but there's actually a lot of smaller internet service providers that are willing to do the work for a lot less. And there's also local municipalities that want to do the work as well, and we should allow for that. So it really was a sort of a bold, progressive way of looking at our infrastructure and how we can ensure that even if you're in South LA or you're in rural California, doesn't mean that you don't deserve internet and you don't deserve or you deserve slow speeds. So we want to make sure that we were doing that. So that's what the bill did. There's a lot of other wonky technical things to it, but it didn't pass. We're looking forward to moving this forward again next year. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about it.
Thank you for joining us and thank you for sharing. Josh, can you please share with us some of the work that you're doing in your area?
Sure. First off, good morning, everybody. Good to see you all. Thank you to the panel for being here, our moderators, and of course, our Trojan family. Fight on always. Yeah, so I am in Monterey County, California. I'm from San Diego. My wife is from LA. And so we're in a very rural, small school district. Beautiful hills, a lot of vineyards and ranches, which, again, coming from San Diego is very different for me and my wife. Yeah, so the work we're doing when COVID hit threw everybody for a loop. And so I was fortunate to have students that already had devices for the most part in our district. We had aging devices, so there was a segment where some of those devices were probably going to not work very soon. But for the most part, our kids had devices. But I knew that with COVID, and we had the shelter in place, that we were going to have to do some sort of virtual learning. So I ordered Chromebooks through generous donations from Monterey County Office of Ed, private donations. Those Chromebooks were ordered in late May. And I was told, hey, they would be getting here in July. July came and went. And pretty soon we're starting a brand new school year. And August was rolling around. And so I talked to our IT director, Eric, great guy. And I said, listen, Eric, I don't know when these devices are getting here, but we finished one school year. We're going to start a brand new school year. The governor just came in and said, hey, all school districts in California are going to be virtually learning. I said, we need to make sure our kids have devices. And so what he did, him and his son, Mac, they took over our auditorium here at the school district. And we had some older devices, and I termed it as the Frankenstein lab. They took it and just took pieces from one, put them on the other. And so we had batteries going from one, keys from one to the other. And so we were able to get devices in the hands of our kids because we're waiting for these devices. And now it's October and we're still waiting for these devices. So that was one component. The other component was internet. And so again, coming from a large city like San Diego, you have a lot of that access at your fingertips. And in rural California, right, in Lockwood, where we're located, we have beautiful hills and valleys, but internet is sometimes difficult. And so I made contact with some very big companies, and I'm sure other people did, and the response wasn't that great. But I did contact some local service providers. I want to give a plug for Ranch Wi-Fi, who is a Central Coast internet provider, good family-run company. But I reached out and I just laid it all out on the line and said, hey, listen, our families are struggling. We have, virtual learning that needs to take place. We have kids that need to continue to learn. How can you help us out? And so Ben, the owner of the company, we had this great conversation, and he said, hey, listen, I hear what you're saying. I want to help you and your kids. We'll figure the details out later, but I want to provide your district free internet from March through the end of the year in June. And so for me, it's the conversation, it's the relationship, because I later found out that Ben's wife is also a teacher. And so this was personal to him. It was impacting him and his family. And so that connection where we talk in our community about being all in, right? This whole mentality of you're helping kids, you're helping the community, and Ben was a part of that. So that's kind of what we're doing. And the last piece really is the training. So we have devices, we have internet, and I can tell you basically all our families have internet now. And if they weren't able to connect, we partnered with AT&T to get hotspots. And so when you have devices, you have the internet, now comes the training. And so you can't just give kids these tools, you can't just give teachers all this responsibility and not prep them and not train them. Same with parents, because parents are now the primary educator right now at home because we're distance learning. And so we've partnered with the Dynamic Learning Project, which is a partnership between Google, Digital Promise, and the EdTech team. And it provides a coaching model for our teachers where they identify a challenge in their classroom and they're able to leverage technology to help better improve their instructional practice, right? So that's the teacher side of it, but we got to help our families. And so we're partnering with Fresno State University and their parent university, which offers virtual courses on things like social and emotional wellness, digital literacy, and financial literacy. And so from our end, I believe one of the roles I serve is besides looking out for the health and well-being of kids and families, is also to remove barriers. And so if I can put things in place where kids now have internet, families have internet, we have devices, and staff and families are being provided access to training, I feel like we're helping provide a lot of support and removing a lot of barriers. So that is what we're doing at the San Antonio School District.
Thank you so much. And Angelina, I know you're doing some great work as well. Can you share with our listeners?
Absolutely, Faith. Thank you for having me on the panel today to bring a global perspective about continuing education in COVID-19. And Pasha, thank you for that introduction. I'm going to have you at all of my speaking engagements to introduce me. I appreciate that. Senator Gonzalez and Josh, it's great to be on a panel with two other policymakers and educators who are in the trenches trying to figure things out. So it's an honor to sit here with you today and network and chat. And welcome to all of our guests. As Pasha shared with you earlier, I am currently earning an EDD in global education policy. My career was a veteran teacher and school administrator and admissions director. So I'm pivoting to a new sort of education space. And what I have found out in my research is there's a lot of mirroring of accessibility issues worldwide. I specifically work with a school in Ghana. We are in a rural area. So we're 9 hours away from the capital, 9 hours along unpaved roads. We're way out there. We're almost to the next country. And that means, I'm giving you some context so you can visualize what some of our challenges were when we got the memo from the Ministry of Education that we had to roll out a distance learning program. So to give you some context, there is no fiber optic option. There is no provider option. There's one provider in that particular area. It's very spotty. And the village is a place where there are no devices for most of the residents. There are no devices for students. The only option we had was mobile phones. And if you look at the research, mobile phones allow people in rural areas, in areas far from city centers and urban centers, to stay connected. And specifically, my research is in sub-Saharan Africa. And the mobile phone is used for all kinds of communication and in ways that we don't necessarily use it here. So one thing about Africa is that they were very organized. Early March, the African Union rolled out a continental strategy for COVID-19. And part of that continental strategy was a rollout of distance learning for K through college education. And across the continent, there are 54 countries there. So across the continent, that rolled out varied. Different countries have different access to connectivity and access to networks. Ghana was able to roll out some distance learning in the city centers for college students, but we saw that research showed that the primary students were the ones who were excluded and suffered the most. So at first we thought we were going to be closed, like everybody, we were going to be closed for a few weeks. So we started on the campus, they started working on sanitizing protocols, on staggered lunch times, on staggered bus pickups. So the school in Ghana had a full plan to reopen when we thought in 3 weeks. And my responsibility here as part of their COVID-19 team and as their regular volunteer teacher trainer, I've been working with them since August of 2018. I'm strategizing in the United States to see if there's any technology or anything that I have that I can offer that they can use in their context. And so eventually when we found out that schools were going to be closed for an undetermined amount of time, we had to look in our environment and see what we could use. And those two outlets, those two pieces of connectivity were WhatsApp, text and audio, and radio. It was very interesting trying to roll that out. To give you a little bit of context, the school regularly communicates with their families on WhatsApp, because if you have WhatsApp, you know that the data is very accessible because it's inexpensive. There's a certain aspect of it that's free. So they have different groups. They have a faculty group on WhatsApp. They have groups for each class on WhatsApp, and they do almost all of their communication on WhatsApp. Their teachers don't have laptops. They don't have emails. That's how they communicate. So we decided, how can we use this tool that we already have, this communications tool that we already have, to roll out a program? So I worked here on my end doing some research about teaching on WhatsApp, and the school in Ghana was doing regular faculty meetings to decide how we were going to upload information to the phone, how we were going to communicate with the parents and the students. And we rolled out a WhatsApp lesson program, I would say in about week 3 or 4. And then the other aspect was the radio program. And the head of school went to the local radio and asked if we could get airtime. So we had airtime twice a week. We did some fundraising for airtime because we're a rural school and we don't have a budget for that. And we launched a radio program. So we had to choose which subject. So we did science on Sundays and reading and language arts on Tuesdays. We did science for 4th and 5th on Sunday, and then K through 3 was the reading and language arts on Tuesday. And we ran the radio program from April to July. I've chosen to center my dissertation around that. My dissertation was based on classroom ethnographies before, but nobody's in class. So I had to do something different. And what we found is that WhatsApp and radio are very effective, but rural areas have major connectivity issues. And what we're concerned about on a policy level is an increase in the gap in the digital divide. We think that at the end of COVID, there may be such a learning loss in the areas that weren't connected that those particular students won't be able to catch up. So we are once again going to try to launch the radio program in the fall, probably in the next couple of weeks, maybe in November. The WhatsApp was challenging because students did not have their own phones. They had to access their parents' phones, and their parents were at work. Their parents were not available. So there were all sorts of attendant issues that were out of our control that we couldn't necessarily address. Globally, we're seeing some of the same challenges with connectivity, where if you live outside of the city center, you have very few options other than WhatsApp and radio. And because that field of launching education on WhatsApp is so new, there's not a lot of off-the-shelf information about it. Lesson plans, you could go to Lakeshore and buy a lesson plan book, but you can't do that with WhatsApp because it's a totally different approach. So the research hasn't been done yet, which is one of the challenges. So we're sort of building the plane as we're flying it. And we had some moments where we were just soaring, and then we had some moments where we felt like we were going to fall out the sky, to be quite frank. But that's pretty much an overview of what's happening in sub-Saharan Africa. Again, 54 countries. You have a variety of levels of success across the continent. And we meaning policymakers on the continent, the African Union, and ministries of education and researchers such as myself who are doing research in sub-Saharan Africa, our bottom line concern is getting students learning in some way, shape, or form using the tools that you have available and in the context of your community.
Thank you so much, Angelina, for sharing your perspective along with Senator Gonzalez and Josh Van Norman. We do appreciate it. I actually wanted to sort of turn this over to some question and answers. There are a few in our question answer box as well as a few that I have. And I'm going to start off with Angelina, since you were the one that just finished. But what has been one of the biggest challenges when working to provide resources for education?
Sure, and I'll give it to you in my specific context. There are about 3 challenges that we've come into that really have inhibited our progress. And the first, again, is connectivity. We are by no means able to have the same capability to have connectivity as you would in Los Angeles or even a small suburb or even a rural area of the United States. So connectivity and access to connectivity are, the first thing. The second thing is finances and the money to launch online programming. That does take a budget. And specifically for COVID-19, no one had that sort of emergency budget, the large amount that was needed to really address everything that you need to address during COVID-19. And I would say in our context, the last issue is policy. One of the challenges that I see globally in areas such as sub-Saharan Africa is the voice of the actual teacher and the educator on the ground is really not reflected in the policy. So policymakers don't spend time visiting classrooms and being on site. So it's great that the African Union acted so quickly and created a COVID-19 policy, but it's not realistic to expect rural schools away from the urban centers to roll out online education without the resources and connectivity. So I would say the third issue would be policy.
Thank you. And Josh, from your perspective, same question. What is one of the biggest challenges that you face with working to provide resources for education?
Yeah, so great question. I think, and I'm thinking back to even when I was a teacher, and it's the same thing now that I'm a superintendent, it's funding, right? And so I look at the example I shared of Ranch Wi-Fi, right? And that to me is an anomaly where someone just gives you free internet for a period of time. But that's not sustainable. And as I talked to Ben later in the summer, and we were trying to work something out for this upcoming school year, he said, hey, listen, Josh, this is a family run business and we have bills to pay and we need to make some money. And I totally understood his perspective, because he's in business to provide for his family. So to me, it always comes back down to funding. And right now, I think, have put some Band-Aids on things to make it work for the time being. I can tell you that some of the funding that we have access to expires in December of this year. And so my thought would be, let's extend that at least to the end of the school year, because I don't know any educator that would say, hey, yes, use your funding by December. And then logically, the next question would be, so what funding do you have for the rest of the school year? So the money piece, and then how can we sustain this? Because as one of the questions that was put in the chat box so aptly pointed out, this is not a new issue, right? It's just been magnified and everybody's spotlighting it because we're all living it. And so what can we do to sustain this system where kids have access to internet, reliable internet, no matter where they live, and access to technology? So.
This next question is for Lena. How did the pandemic influence policymaking on this issue, and why is it still a challenge to pass SB 1130?
Thank you so much for that question. And I couldn't agree more with both Josh and Angelina as it pertains to just the issues, because funding is absolutely important, as well as political will. And I think that's leading into this question is, SB 1130, again, was created and we had the foresight to think about this even before COVID hit, because we knew, as somebody had mentioned and alluded to, is this is not a new issue. We've been dealing with this. And unfortunately, I don't think the state has put enough emphasis on this particular issue. And then we get to the problem, and then it's, scrambling to find solutions. So I think a lot of it with SB 1130, what I've learned, again, it was a very progressive, bold move looking forward for a broadband for all strategy for every single Californian. Again, whether you're in South LA or rural Monterey, where Josh represents, you should have access to high speed, high quality internet. Because of your zip code, that shouldn't determine low speeds, low quality, or no infrastructure investment. And so this really pushed large internet service providers to think larger. Like, it's nice to get the hotspots and the Wi-Fi, but as Angelina mentioned, there's some places where it's very difficult to lay down fiber. So we've got to think a little bit bigger and push and ask more of our large companies to invest in us, and also build innovation around that with smaller companies that can do the work as well. As Josh alluded to, Ranch Wi-Fi that came in and supplemented them, thank goodness. And so political will, we've got a big lobby in Sacramento, unfortunately, that the forces were against SB 1130 in that sense. We had a large coalition of seniors from AARP, small school districts, rural counties, LAUSD, Long Beach Unified, up and down the state, a great coalition. And, the large service providers didn't really want this to move forward. They didn't want competition like local governments having an ability to create municipal broadband. And, quite frankly, again, we had to push and do more. So I think the political will sometimes is what gets in the way, unfortunately, even during this crisis. And next year, and what we're continuing to do, is build a larger coalition through the end of this year in the interim, to build more consensus in the legislature, as well as more a coalition of more supporters in our nonprofits and our school districts, both large and small. Just everyone kind of coming together to build solutions that work for everybody. So that is the plan for next year. In fact, we're having a forum next week with Tom Wheeler, the former FCC chairman under Obama, to start talking about this and how we can, how he is led at the federal level and how California can continue to be a leader. What I don't like is when we call ourselves the 5th largest economy, yet we're not providing more resources for education and technology. We can't say that yet and tout that unless we start having a plan for the digital divide in a very mindful way. Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, as a follow-up to that, Senator Gonzalez, educators have known that inequalities in internet and technology access long pre-existed the pandemic, and the pandemic made this issue ever apparent. How can we leverage this access to help create more equality in access?
Is that one for me again?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. No problem. Yeah, more equality and access. That's right. I mean, I think I'm actually listening to Angelina and Josh and thinking about incredible ideas that we can implement even within, like, again, I always go back to South Central LA. That's part of where I represent, because there's some census tracts that have absolutely no infrastructure. And I think about, okay, we could use WhatsApp. That's another opportunity. We sometimes think that the infrastructure is not there, the political will is not there, so these kids have to wait. And really, it's not even just about distance learning too. It's about telehealth. We know a lot of seniors right now are utilizing telehealth for their medical services. They can't go in for whatever reason. It's just too dangerous for them to go in during this environment. So we've got to build other avenues in the interim that build even more access during this unequitable time. And I think WhatsApp is a good one. If we don't have another alternative, radio is another good one that we can think about and utilize. From Angelina's experiences and work in the sub-Saharan Africa region, I think those are ways in which we can think more collaboratively and think a little bit more differently in how we can provide additional resources, not just, again, the infrastructure bill on SB 1130 is going to come, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. So what else can we do to provide more resources in that fashion? So hoping to gain more insight and find more ways we can expand even more equity within access.
This next question is for Josh. Funding for education is even more important now. What do you foresee as the long-term challenge with an increase in costs for technology, given limited resources being provided?
Yeah, great question. I think this is always something we talk about in education, and this is forcing people to get very creative. And so one of the questions I'll point back to also talked about private and public partnerships. I mean, again, I come back to my role as removing barriers. And so it's just getting different people to the table and talking about how can we help kids. And so funding, I gave the example of how it ends in December. So what are we going to do the rest of the year? Now you have to creatively have your game plan ready, but there needs to be a longer term solution. And again, these issues have been highlighted, but they're not new. So yeah, it's posing a challenge, especially in a rural district where technology and access to that has been an issue for years. And now we've kind of closed that gap. But moving forward, how can we sustain that? And that's always been the challenge. But I think involving different groups of people to get it done is crucial. And so we need people to go out and vote. I know it's a very interesting time in our history, but I would always say, share your voice and vote, and let's make some positive change happen.
Thank you. This next question is for Angelina. Given your work both here in the US and internationally, do you think there are lessons we can learn from international cases that can be used at this moment in time in the US?
Absolutely. That's one of the fun things about working internationally is you learn so much. As in my research, one of the things that we do is we identify our positionality, which really gives you the opportunity to sort of check your biases and adjust your lens and enter into a research situation where you're learning, you're open. Specifically, the research approach that I use, which is called critical emancipatory participatory action research, which is a long way of saying you're not the only expert. The people who you're working with are the experts on their environment. You are part of the team. So coming from that perspective has allowed me to learn a lot. And some of the things that I have learned from my time in Sanasi, which is the city where I work, is how to do things in parallel, how to affect policy while also doing the work and getting the resources that you need to do the work when you can't get the policymakers to do what you need them to do. So community development and partnerships are much easier to establish because we're so far from the city centers. So we can make things happen fairly quickly. And I have thought of ways of how to translate that ability to develop our community and find what we need within our own community to launch the programs that we need. And my mentee, the one that founded the school, the proprietor, he actually is a businessman. He's Ghanaian, and he was recruited to launch Uber in the country. So he has a great business mind about how to create partnerships to launch things and to meet the needs of his community. So that's the first thing that I'm learning, and that I think we could learn from other communities. I'm also seeing that there is a greater sense of community and a less of a focus on the individual in this particular community, but also it's in the research, it's shown that that's the perspective across sub-Saharan Africa as well. So that makes implementing safety measures for COVID easier because everyone believes in the wellness of the community as opposed to what I want to do. Protecting the community is the most important thing. So it was easy for the school, for example, to shut down and launch the WhatsApp program and the radio program. Literally, the teachers sort of pivoted very quickly and were on board immediately, even though their salaries were reducing, even though there were so many changes at the school. So there's such a different outlook that it made pivoting into lockdown protocols much easier. I would also say one thing we can, the last thing, and then I'll turn it back over to you, is learning alternative strategies. And Senator Gonzalez, we need to chat because I have some information that might be helpful for that particular area with no infrastructure. Learning how to make do with what you have and being creative with what you have. They have done amazing work in the middle of nowhere with very little connectivity and very few financial resources. They've been able to create partnerships. They've been able to create partnership with me all the way here in the United States. I've been there twice. We meet every other week. I'm totally invested. So I've learned really to be more innovative and to be more creative in my solutions and problem solving.
Thank you. This next question is actually for all of the panelists. So whoever would like to start, please feel free. What do you see are the similarities and differences in the digital divide across urban and rural settings? Who would like to kick that off?
I can maybe take a crack at this. And Angelina, I will definitely take you up on that offer to connect because I think there's a lot of great work you're doing. So I appreciate that. So what I've learned over this, having worked in this space for some time, but especially over this last year, is that there are, for instance, some data for you first is most rural communities, I think there's about 30% that are online, solidly online. And there's still about 60, in some cases, 70% of rural communities that are offline. Same data in the areas that I've been talking about in urban LA. I think there's oftentimes a thought that you're in Los Angeles, you're in a metropolitan area, you've got it covered, but there's still some places that are not invested in. And so I think that's where the similarities lie. And when we created SB 1130, it was with that unification in mind, that we didn't want to just look at this as just a rural bill or just an urban bill or for dense populations. This was a bill for everybody because we all are dealing with it in some way or shape or form. We're just in different regions. I have talked to rural teachers in up north that say that they're utilizing buses for hotspots. Some of them are going directly to, knocking on doors, giving out paperwork for their kids. And then I have the same thing sort of similar in the area that I represent in Senate District 33 in Southeast Los Angeles and South LA, where teachers are going above and beyond just to get this homework to these kids and printing things themselves because these kids just don't have access. As we've seen, the two girls, I think there's a photo that went viral of two girls at a Taco Bell parking lot in Los Angeles that went viral. The fact that they have to go to a parking lot at Taco Bell to do their homework, or the rural kid up north has to go to a bus stop or a parking lot, is just not okay. So I think that's where we see the similarities with rural and urban communities, and where we as a state cannot continue to let this happen. Again, we have to ensure that we're making investments and doing so in a way that includes all. If we're going to be again, I keep reiterating, if we're going to be the 5th largest economy, we can't leave these kids behind.
Josh, same question, similarities and differences in the digital divide across urban and rural settings?
Yeah, I'd like to echo what the senator said, because I completely agree as far as the similarities. And that actually caught me off guard, because being in a rural district, yeah, connectivity is an issue. And because we're so spread out, we are the largest geographic district in Monterey County. And that poses its own challenges. But when I saw other data in our county that we were better connected than some of our more urban districts, that shocked me. And I couldn't understand that, because given the proximity of where we are versus where they are, I would naturally think, hey, infrastructure is already there. And it's not. And so I think there are similarities where both of these districts struggle with connectivity. But I think the differences are just the challenges. I think this district, we're just extremely spread out. And so I can tell you that we get our internet from the County Office of Education up in Salinas. That is miles away. And it pings signals off different hills, literally, that come back to our district. And so I think that's a challenge that we face. The other areas, I think it's more infrastructure that's not there. And I didn't really realize that until I started looking at this data, how different that was. So unique challenges, but I think, yeah, this is a time. And again, one of the questions in the chat was, should we invest more now moving forward? Yeah, I don't see why we shouldn't. This is an opportunity to really make a difference, because if we don't do it now, then I don't know when you would do it. So.
And then Angelina, same question.
Sure, I echo the points that have been made, and I want to add on to say what I'm noticing in both rural and urban areas is, number one, everybody's struggling. Teachers, parents, none of us have been in a pandemic before, and it's hard. And I am encouraging my teacher friends and my friends with children to give yourself some grace. There have been some countries who have just said this is a lost school year, and they are going to start over in January 2021. Ghana is one of those places. Primary schools will not open for the rest of the school year, and they're going to start over in January. So I'm seeing that in both environments, that people are just confused and it's difficult. The second thing that I'm also seeing is both environments also, we don't have emergency education protocols in place because we've never had to do this before. So as Josh pointed out, this is the time to do the research and to start putting the infrastructure in place so that if things do start happening again, similar to this, we have these emergency protocols put in place. And that is just generally a good practice. For example, Africa was so prepared because they have had Ebola epidemics, they have had the HIV epidemic, so they have very good community health protocols in place and community outreach protocols in place. So taking that example and using it for putting education in emergency protocols in place is a good idea. So I think both rural and urban centers need to be doing the research like I'm doing to create programs and protocols. And I would say one of the differences that I see between rural and urban environments is really, there's an economic, socioeconomic issue overlaid with that. You can have some rural areas that are where the residents have more money, they're better off economically, and you can have rural areas where families are struggling, and same thing with urban areas. So I think we also need to recognize that there is a wealth divide as well. Because if you have parents, for example, at private schools, I have friends with students at private schools, they were up and running very quickly. And parents with the expendable income can hire tutors or pod teachers or extra download extra programs because they have the finances. And that is not necessarily tied to where they live, but what sort of class and what their wealth looks like. So those will be my observations in terms of the differences and the similarities between the rural and the urban environments.
Thank you. This next question is either for Senator Gonzalez or for Josh. How can teachers and other members of the education community help you push the issue of connectivity and funding?
I was going to be a gentleman and let you, Senator, go first, but thank you for letting me go. So I think before I answer that question, I want to give a shout out to all the educators out there right now. I don't know of any industry where we ask more of a group of people and provide them with less. And it seems like this happens every year. And in the current environment, we're asking, just so the panel knows, but I mean for our guests here, just so we're all clear, we got a waiver as a district, by the way, to go back in person, which is awesome. We're very excited. But now on top of all the regular things that educators have to do, we're looking at, symptoms of COVID-19, right? And so now we're asking educators to become somewhat healthcare experts and take temperatures and do all these things. And so I just want to start by saying thank you, teachers, all the educators across the world for what you do, because it doesn't go unnoticed. In terms of the question, I would say get loud and vote. I think it's extremely important to get people together. It can't just be teachers, right? It has to be the community at large. And so, but I also think we sometimes have to take the bull by the horns. And I will use our district as an example because I'm a parent myself. My son's going to be 2 in December. He's already at that age where he's running and climbing, and he's got a lot of energy. And I wish I had the same energy, but I want to know as a parent that my school district would be doing everything they possibly could for my child. And I think sometimes we get caught up with these barriers with red tape, and we have meetings, and as educators, we're very good at having meetings. But I think sometimes you just have to sit down, look people in the eye and say, how can we get this done? Because at the end of the day, we're all here for kids. And so let's put ego aside, differences aside. And I think that's one of the things I've seen in this pandemic. If I can find a silver lining, it's been people are coming together. At least I've seen in my community. I can cite Ranch Wi-Fi, who just says, hey, Josh, we'll figure out the details later. Free internet, let's get it done. A virtual agreement. I mean, no contract in place. Teachers coming in when the pandemic hit to create packets and do all these virtual lessons. Nobody, we're doing negotiations right now, but nobody at that time said, hey, Josh, is this going to go on my timesheet for extra time? People just, hey, we're all in, we're getting it done. And the same with our technology, our IT director who fixed all of our devices. Nobody batted an eye because people understood the issue at hand was, hey, we got to help our kids. And I think if we acted with urgency like that all the time, I think some of these issues wouldn't be as big as they currently are.
And I'm with Josh on that. Voting, of course, is so very important. This is like one of the most critical elections. It's so very important to make your voice heard. Can't emphasize that enough. I would also say, I'm not just a senator, I'm a mom of 3 boys. So like Josh, I have a real invested interest in ensuring that our educational system in California continues to get better and that we do support our teachers. I've done kindergarten distance learning, and I don't ever want to do this again. It is so hard. And I think about teachers in my neighborhood that are doing this with their own kids. And so I'm often talking to my friends who are teachers and our local teachers associations, and even teachers up and down the state that are not even in my district, to understand their needs and to understand what they're going through, not just professionally, but personally, and how we can continue to support them. I would ask that if you have, you need additional question, or you have additional questions on the bill that we're continuing to carry and we can make it better with your input, please email my office, senator.gonzalez@senate.ca.gov. We're also having, as chair of the pandemic committee, not only looking at health and safety issues, but this month, the 26th, I believe, we're going to have a reopening of schools distant learning segment. And that will look an oversight of all of the governor's executive orders and where we need to pivot and what we need to do for the next calendar year. And so I would encourage, if you can, and I know it's probably during the school day, but it's always recorded, for you to listen to that and see if there's any way we can do things better as a legislature. We do often have teachers that call in, but just sending us some information that is important to you, I think, is really important for us to know about as we're legislating and as we're looking ahead for the next legislative session, because I think not having your voice and just us doing what we need to do in Sacramento is not enough, especially right now.
Thank you for that, Senator Gonzalez. This next question is actually for all of you, or whoever would like to answer. You all mentioned that the pandemic has made the digital divide ever apparent. Do you think that this is the moment, that this moment will create the opportunity for more long-term investments in distant learning and increased broadband access?
I'll hop in. My perspective is a little different because in sub-Saharan Africa, they are just getting their technology infrastructure, maybe like in the past 15, 20 years. They're just now getting their infrastructure in place. So it is an opportunity for the continent to really pay attention to it. And actually, there's a lot of tech development that's happening on the continent, but it's slow because of funding, because of policy, same things that we see here in the United States. But what I'm hearing, what I'm reading, what I'm seeing from different news outlets and resources and friends on the ground in all of these different countries on the continent, there is a shift toward, we need to address this, but the concern is, how is that going to be done? Where you have the disparity is wider, where you have connectivity in the urban centers, but then you have families like in Sanasi, for example, where if it rains, it's hard to get a phone call through. So the divide is already so wide that you will see some development in countries such as South Africa that already have a head start. Rwanda is doing some really good development on their tech. There's some countries that already have a head start, but there are some that are very far behind. So from my perspective, the gap itself, the existing gap, is a challenge. It has been, and the impetus for more tech development, but it's going to take a lot more than what we see here in stateside.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to jump in?
Real quick, yeah, I think now would be a time, if there were ever any time, to invest. And I think technology and devices and internet is a logical step, absolutely. But I can tell you, mental health and social emotional well-being of kids and staff and families is something that's not often mentioned, but it should be. And I can think back to our first day of school, right? Virtual school. And typically I visit classrooms anyways, but I can tell you one of the saddest things I saw was a kindergarten classroom where some of them, that's their first experience with school. And they're logging in, and we know kindergartners have high energy. And it was one of the quietest virtual classrooms I've ever seen. And I think because they were just staring at a screen, they had no idea what was going on. And so I think whenever this, whether it's COVID-19 or something, whenever this goes away and we can return to somewhat normal conditions, I think investing in mental health and social emotional well-being, counselors on campus, because yes, logically, we're going to have infrastructure in place for distance learning. We're just going to, because there could be something down the line that happens again where we're going to need to pivot and go back virtual. But I think investing in mental health, because I'm seeing things with our kids, with our families who are stressed beyond belief, people have lost jobs. And this is taken, yeah, we talk about the academic issues, but I think the mental health issues are something that not really mentioned a lot, but are, I think, prevalent in a lot of our communities.
And I would just add, continued support for parents, because I know so many parents in my district I see that are working, they're either single parents or they're working a few jobs, they're essential workers. And so there's an overlay, as we talked about with COVID-19 right now, obviously with more African-American and Latino communities seeing disproportionate levels of COVID-19 positive cases. So they have that to worry about on top of on top of the distance learning issues. So there's got to be a strategic plan for them, these communities that we cannot leave behind. The state has done well with COVID-19 and ensuring that if you're a county that can get to the next level of less restriction, that you're not leaving these communities of color behind. And that should be the same idea and thought as it pertains to our schools. And many of our schools are already doing that, but it should be done in a standardized way statewide. So one other thing that we should be focused on.
Thank you. And we're coming up on the hour, so I'm going to give one more question. Let's see. Oh, we often talk about broadband as a public utility. However, access and the infrastructure is managed by private companies. Do any of you think that broadband should be a public utility? And if yes or no, why?
I would think so. If there is a push globally for the more use of technology in education. If you look at the Education for All goals that UNESCO focuses on, technology is repeated. If you want everybody, to me, it's simple. If you want students to have technology integrated in their education, then they need the devices and they need the connectivity. If that is going to be a universal standard. If everybody is not provided with the same access to devices and connectivity, then right off the bat, you have a divide because everybody doesn't have what they need. So, I'm not a policymaker, I'm in the trenches, and it makes sense to me. Get kids and teachers and administrators what they need so they can meet the educational goals that people make. And maybe that's too simplified, but that's what I think.
Angelina, I agree with you. You simplify it. I love simplifying things because to me, I completely agree. To me, whether it's public or private, I just want what's best for kids and for staff and for families. So however we can get that done, let's get it done. I know that's simplified, but I echo what Angelina said. I think that was a great answer.
And I am a yes, yes, yes. I believe similar to what both Josh and Angelina said as well. I think this is why we created SB 1130, is to allow municipalities that aren't being invested in to create their own public option. And we should have an equal playing field. Again, just like you have water and you just have, like air quality issues, we all want it to be on the same playing field. And when we're too reliant, I think, on private companies to give us data and information and, to invest in our communities, oftentimes we see the expectations are not met. And so I do believe that there could be an option, a public option for this, absolutely. And it's been done. Places like San Leandro actually utilized fiber. The school district utilized fiber around their community and sold the fiber to their community for like $10 a month, high speed, high quality internet. And it could be done. I know it can. You see Utah, who you would think, California is really progressive. How is Utah beating us at the fiber public option? And other countries as well, like South Korea, that have these options in their backyard. But we haven't again done this. I don't again think there's the public or the political will. And we've just got to ask in this meantime, even if we don't have that and it's a few conversations down the road, even if it's in a hybrid format, private and public options in the state, we have to think and act and ask more of these private companies. For instance, data on where the lines extend. We've done some data around that, and you'll see that many of the lines are in the coastal regions. And then once it gets inland, it stops. And that's unfortunate for our rural communities, like where Josh is at, and for areas like the Southeast LA portion, which I represent, that just is not fair. So we've got to do more there.
Well, I just want to thank all of our panelists for a great program today. I hope that everyone has enjoyed this discussion as much as I have. The USC Alumni Education Network hosts programming and events throughout the year, ranging from community service projects to informative presentations like today that appeal to Trojans of all ages and interests. Please make sure you follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn at USC AEDN to stay connected and learn about our upcoming events. Thank you all again, and to all of our panelists for joining us today. Have a great day and fight on.